Alright, this is the Unit 24 Part 2 video lesson of the 6 kingdoms and the tools of classification. Make sure you're writing everything down in your journal, and following along, and pausing and rewatching any parts that you may be confused on. Alright, so first let's go back over and discuss the 3 domains. So we have the 3 domains of all living things, and these are going to be archaea, bacteria, or eubacteria, it's the same thing, and eukarya. Alright, and so we have our first 2 domains, archaea and bacteria. These are actually our prokaryotes. Okay, so every organism that's in these 2 domains are going to be made of a prokaryotic cell. Our last domain, eukarya, these are our eukaryotes. So every organism in eukarya is going to be eukaryotic. Right, now remember each domain, according to the order of classification, under each domain, those domains are divided into kingdoms. So we have our 3 domains, and now we're going to discuss the 6 kingdoms. Our first kingdom is going to fall under the domain of archaea. And so we have domain archaea, I can spell it right, archaea, right, kingdom archaea. So in this kingdom, these are characterized as our extreme ophiles. Okay, and by this I mean they live in extreme environments. So you're going to find archaea in mostly everywhere on the planet. Okay, they can live in high salt concentrations like Dead Sea. Those are called halophiles. Halophiles equals lots of salt, very salty. They can live in extreme temperatures. These are called thermophiles. So these are the type of archaea that might live in the hot springs in Yellowstone National Park. We have acidophiles, or methanogens, that live in very acidic areas. These might live in the bottom of the ocean in those sulfuric vents in the bottom of the ocean. So archaea are going to be found pretty much everywhere on the planet. They have evolved to be able to survive in different extreme environments. Alright. After archaea, our next domain is our bacteria domain. And our kingdom here is going to be bacteria. And so in this kingdom, we are going to have, these are our everyday bacteria. Okay, these are the ones that are around us. They are the ones that live on our skin. Example might be E. coli, strep, those types of bacteria that live around us, on us, around us, in us. They are going to make up this kingdom. All right? They are prokaryotes. Something that I should mention that I did not include on the previous slide, which you should go back and add, is that archaea always have a cell wall. Okay? But it's not peptidoglycan. Okay? Whereas in bacteria, these have a cell wall made of peptidoglycan. So that is one characteristic that separates these organisms from each other. Okay, so both these kingdoms always have a cell wall. Alright, let's go now on to talking about the different organisms that fall into the domain of eukarya. So eukarya is actually broken down into 4 separate kingdoms. We have first Protista, then we have fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. So these are the 4 kingdoms that make up the domain of eukarya. Let's start by breaking down and talking about Protista a little bit more. So Protista is actually a very complicated kingdom because it has, these are races basically like where everything that doesn't fit in one category is put here. So these are going to be always single-celled. Well, maybe we shouldn't say always. We should say most of the time. Most of the time they are single-celled. There are exceptions to the rule. Mostly single-celled. They are going to be, they can either be heterotrophs or autotrophs. They may or may not have a cell wall, so some have cell wall. We have different categories, so if we are a fungus-like protist, you could have a plant-like for protist, or an animal-like protist. This means that these protists mimic those types of cells. So example of a fungus-like protist would be a yeast cell. Example of a plant-like protist would be algae. Example of animal-like protist would be an amoeba. Right, so these are all different types of protists, and they are mostly single-celled. They can be heterotrophs or autotrophs. Obviously, the autotrophs are going to be like our algae, because they're going to be able to do photosynthesis. Alright, next let's talk about kingdom fungi. Fungi are always always going to have a cell wall. Made of chitin. Okay, they are mostly multicellular. Some unicellular. And they are only heterotrophs. Okay, because they are decomposers. They feed on dead and decaying matter. Now, I have seen this question more than once on the STAR test, where they put and say which one of these would be able to make its own food, and people actually pick a mushroom. Okay, a mushroom is a fungus. A mushroom does not do photosynthesis. It does not make its own food. It breaks down dead and decaying matter. So, fungus are not autotrophs. They cannot make their own food, and they have to break down food and consume other organisms, just like us. Okay, so examples of fungi would be mushrooms, molds, things like that. Right, next we have, I keep on hitting that wrong button. Right, next we have Plantae. Plantae, these are going to be, they always have a cell wall. Okay, they're going to be multicellular. They are going to be non-motile, meaning that they are not able to move around. they're going to always be autotrophs, meaning they are able to make their own food. And they're going to reproduce both asexual and sexually. So to be in Kingdom Plantae, you have to meet all of these different criteria. Let me note here that you have to do photosynthesis. So this would be Kingdom Plantae. You'd be a plant if you met all of these different criteria. Alright, you might be an animal. You might fall under Kingdom Animalia if you are multicellular. Okay, you have no cell walls. You are motile, you're able to move around. You are a heterotroph, meaning you have to consume other organisms. And you can reproduce either asexually or sexual reproduction. So these different criteria are going to be what makes you an animal. Alright? So let's put this all together by looking and examining these different kingdoms on a chart together. Alright, let's recap the 6 kingdoms as while we fill in this chart together. Actually, it looks like it's cut off part of this. Hold on. Alright, that's better. Now we can see the entire chart. Okay, first let's go and review Kingdom Archaea. So Archaea, we said we're prokaryotic, so we're going to write a P in our chart. We know that prokaryotes do not have a nucleus, so where it says has a nucleus, we will say no. There is no nucleus. Single-celled or multicellular. Archaea are always going to be single-celled. Method for obtaining energy. Archaea can be both auto and hetero. They can be both types. Alright, type of reproduction is going to be asexual. Method of movement, they're going to be motile. And they're going to use things like cilia and other adaptations to move around. Examples of archaea bacteria would be like a methanogen or a halophile or something like that lives in an extreme environment. Alright, bacteria. These are also prokaryotes. Have a nucleus? No. Single-celled or multi. These are always going to be single-celled. Method for obtaining energy. They can be both auto or hetero. Mostly hetero. Type of reproduction. It's going to be asexual. Remember, that's binary fission. Method of movement, same thing. Motile, they're going to use structures like cilia to be able to move around. Example would be like E. coli, is an example of bacteria. Remember, these are the ones that live on and in and around us. Alright, Kingdom Protista, these are going to be eukaryotic. Have a nucleus? Yes. If it's a eukaryote, that means it has a nucleus. Single-celled or multicellular. These are going to be mostly single cell, but occasionally become multicellular. Alright. Method for obtaining energy. Again, auto or hetero. Type of reproduction is going to be asexual. Method of movement, it's going to be motile, meaning it's able to move, and these are going to be different depending on the type of cell that it is. Example, are an animal-like protist would be like an amoeba or a paramecium. Those are animal-like. Or we had algae, which is our plant-like protist. Fungi, these are also going to be eukaryotes, meaning that they have to have a nucleus. These are going to be mostly multicellular. These are only going to be heterotrophs. Remember, they are decomposers. They have to break down living, dead, and decaying matter. Type of reproduction can be both asexual and sexual. And method of movement, it's going to be non-motile. Example would be like a mushroom or a mold. Alright, plant A is going to be eukaryotic. It does have a nucleus. It's going to be only multicellular. It's going to be only an autotroph because it does photosynthesis. It's going to reproduce both asexually and sexually. Method of movement, non-motile, so it's not going to be moving. An example would be like a sunflower. Alright, last kingdom, our kingdom we fall into, Animalia. These are going to be eukaryotic. Yes, they have a nucleus. They're going to be only multicellular. They're going to be heterotrophs. They can be either, depending on what you are, asexual or sexual. They're going to be motile. So there's lots of different ways for kingdom Animalia to move around. Example would be humans. Alright, so this chart is a good go-to to just glance and make sure that you have the correct things down for the different 6 kingdoms. Alright, so let's talk now about how to read a dichotomous key. So there are different ways that scientists use to figure out where an organism should be classified. A dichotomous key is one of those. So I'm going to walk you through this example and then you'll probably do some practice in class. So when we're looking at these 4 birds and we want to figure out what the name of these birds are, we might have a dichotomous key that helps us do that. So let's start off by looking at bird W. Okay? It says, so we'll always find a dichotomous key, you're always going to start here at number 1. It says the beak is relatively long and slender, or the beak is relatively stout and heavy. So is the beak long and slender, or is it stout and heavy? Well, I would say it's probably B, right? Stout and heavy. So we're going to go down and look at number 2, since that's what it says to do here. The surface of the lower beak is flat and straight, or the bottom surface of the lower beak is curved. So the key word here is it's saying lower beak. Alright, so if we look here at the lower beak is flat and straight. So that means this is going to be Geospiza. So bird W is Geospiza. Okay, so let's look at bird X. Well, again, when we do bird X, you start back over at number 1. So each time you start over with the number 1, okay, even if you move past number 1 with the previous bird. So number 1 says long and slender or stout and heavy. Well, this one's stout and heavy, so again, we're going to go to number 2. Now we're looking at the lower beak. Is it flat and straight, or is it curved? It looks like it's curved. So now we're going to go on to number 3. It says the lower edge of the upper beak has a distinct bend, or the lower edge of the upper beak is mostly flat. So if we look right here very closely at the lower edge of the upper beak, it's kind of tricky because it's confusing wording. But the lower edge would be this edge right here. I'm having a hard time circling it. But the lower edge is flat. So that's going to be Platyspiza. Right? So let's do bird Y. Bird Y, starting over again, back at number 1. Long and slender or stout and heavy? This looks long and slender, so this one's going to have to be Seraphita. Okay, so we got our answer with the first one. So now we'll do our last bird, bird Z. Is it long and slender or stout and heavy? Again, we're starting back over at number 1. Stout and heavy, so we go to number 2. Is the bottom surface flat or is it straight? Well, it's it's actually curved, so we're going to go to number 3. And we see the lower edge of the upper beak is bent, so this is going to be Camarahi, whatever that is. Right? So when you use a dichotomous key, these are actually really easy to do. Just make sure you always start over back at number 1 with each new organism that you were trying to classify. Alright? Alright, the very last thing I want to look at is a cladogram. A cladogram is another tool for classifying organisms, and this is looking at the evolutionary history of an organism. So when you see a cladogram, you're always going to read it from left to right, in that order. And as you notice on the cladogram, we have different branches that branch off a single line, right? So these branches are actually going to have in between them different points, and these are going to be characteristics that all the things after that point are going to have. So for instance, we have our first, going along our line, the first one we have is a hagfish. Okay, nothing before that. As we continue down our cladogram, before we can go any further, we have to go over the line that says jaws. This means that everything after this point has to have jaws. Okay, so that means a perch, salamander, lizard, pigeon, mouse, and chimp all have jaws. Okay, so we go down this, and we keep on going down. We find our perch. Now we're going to keep on going further. Before we can go further, we have to cross over lungs, right? So that means that now everything past this has to have lungs and jaws. So that means our salamander, lizard, pigeon, mouse, and chimp all have jaws and lungs. Makes sense? So as you keep on going down the pathway, eventually we're going to get to our chimpanzee, who's going to have jaws, lungs, claws, nails, and fur and mammary glands, because you had to go past all of those significant evolutionary points before you could get to this organism. Okay? Notice how feathers is on the actual branch. Okay, so that means that the only one that's going to have feathers is the pigeon, because to get up here to the pigeon, you would have to cross over the feathers mark. Okay, so cladograms are actually really easy to read, as long as you understand that if you want to go past a certain point, everything after that point has to have that characteristic. Alright, this will conclude our Unit 24 Part 2 notes. Make sure everything written and recorded, and make sure you get it checked off should you need to. That is it.